Welcome to Life by Design, episode 302. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richardson. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Horatio Jug. We are
We're both raspy today, and you didn't pause so I could say something. So I'm taking the pause anyways.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We are creators of Life by Design with 25 certified locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. Today's episode is, I guess, not brought to you by anybody anymore, Horatio. It's kind of launched into that. So we are looking for sponsors of the show. If there's a new sponsor that wants to jump on board, we're happy to, assuming that your values align with ours. We're happy to fill that spot. So just shoot us a message and let us know.
Sure.
Horatio, just got back from holidays myself, so my voice is a little raspy. We could probably do a whole episode on, how we manage holidays and what it means to go off track and how to get back into the groove, and probably an episode for maybe next week or the week after. Today, though, talking about this study, and I think it's interesting because when I read your notes, my first thought process was, oh, well, why are we talking about this? Because
right.
This study didn't show a positive effect, and I think that's your point. So you're talking about a study from the New England Journal of Medicine, and probiotics were given to children with the stomach flu or gastroenteritis. And basically the probiotics had no effect in helping treat the stomach flu. Coming from a health perspective, you might think that we're, putting out a research study or talking about a research study that says, XYZ is benefited by whether it be probiotics or vitamin D or, spinal correction or exercise or any of the things that we talk about in the Life by Design blueprint. But today we're actually talking about the fact that it didn't help. And Krisha, why don't you make the point that you were making in your show notes as to why that's important, and that will launch us into the episode for today.
Yeah, it's important because it's important, number one, because it's data, and data always links to what's happening in reality. And that's not the point. The point of probiotics are not to treat the stomach flu, right? So this has been our argument all along, Jamie, with this whole idea of alternative health and why I don't want to be considered an alternative practitioner in any way, shape, or form. I'm not advocating the treatment of disease through natural means, through chiropractic or through supplementation. I'm advocating the creation of health, which is two very different fundamental things. One of them is, again, and medicine should be running studies like this, and this is data that should be coming from their camp, because their goal is to fix and treat diseases by any means necessary. So if the claim is made that, hey, probiotics can help, treat a disease, and I think we should mention that there's some flaws potentially with the study, but let's take the results like they're the absolute truth. My first response when I read this was, so that's not the point, right? And I think that sorry to keep going. I think that is the point. I think the biggest message, Life by Design at its core principle, its widest possible abstraction, is teaching people the difference between creating health and treating diseases.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree. I couldn't agree more, I should say, with you. And it really is the fundamental difference between Life by Design. I can't even say chiropractic, because, as you know, there are many variations and iterations of chiropractic. And so when we say Life by Design, we're specifically talking about our approach. But it's not. Go back to one of our mentors many years ago said it's not medicine on one side, and chiropractic on the other, or alternative health on the other. To use that example, it's Life by Design, and really in many ways everything else. And that's not to downplay everything else, Horatio, by any means. There's a role and a position for all of these different health avenues, but the thing that makes them unique and different, or I should say the thing that makes them the same, is that their primary purpose is the treatment of disease. And whether it be through any means necessary, as it is with medicine, whether it be through spinal adjusting, as it is with, say, a corrective chiropractic, or maybe as it is with spinal manipulation and physiotherapies as it is with more conventional chiropractic. You can go down the list, and whatever your method of analysis or method of intervention is, it doesn't change the fact that the goal is for the eradication of the disease, whatever that happens to be. Whereas in a life by design model, whether you have a labeled disease process or not is completely inconsequential to whether or not I'm going to apply some type of strategy to address the needs of your body. And we talk a lot about this requirements and strategies. And so you take this example, there's no doubt that the gut has a specific biome that's required for things to function optimally. And if probiotics can help that biome develop in a more ideal way, then adding probiotics in that sense in someone who is deficient is a positive. It's a good for them. And so even if they had, for example, the stomach flu and they were deficient in their gut biome and you added probiotics and you could measure a positive outcome in the gut biome, but there was no change in the stomach flu, that person still got better. And that's the unique difference between a health creation model, or what you might have heard of as salutogenesis, versus a disease treatment model.
Yeah, I totally agree. Right. I mean, you can pick more ridiculous examples that are more fun to talk about. Right. Like, hey, my house is on fire. Well, did you call the police department? Right. Like, they're not, the purpose of the police department isn't to put out the fire in your house. Right. The purpose of the police department is to protect the citizens. So everything has its own purpose in its own place at the right time. Right. Our whole thing, and again, you said you did a really good job. We're not saying that we're better or superior in any way. In fact, there's certain times when we are, and with certain goals that we are not able to help at all towards that goal, right? Like it all depends on the goals of the human being. Our thing is just, let's make sure that your body is getting what's required all the time, no matter what else is happening.
Right. Well, I think of a great example. We were away on holidays this week, and we gave Andy a new nickname. So if you want to call her by her nickname, it's Andy Stitches.
Nice.
Because she just is daring and risky, and no matter what we say, she's always going to go for it and puts herself in precarious position. So if you could imagine, a little splash pad pool and the different little kid slides, while she's trying to walk up the slide, and it's a pool, so it's wet. And
slippery,
I said multiple times, Andy, don't walk up the slide. And she'd walk up it and slide back down, and does it again. Andy, do not walk up the slide. You're going to fall and smash your face. And well, Andy, it's just, I'm good. I can do it, Dad. I know I can do it. I'll be fine. I can do it. And so there's no arguing. I pretty much would have to go grab her and take her off the slide. And so she goes up the slide, completely slips, feet go right out from under her. And imagine a total epic fail, like the hands don't get down, nothing at all. And I'm just standing there watching. So is Dana, and face just smashes right off the slide.
Oh, man.
And the chin. And she had already had an old scar there from scraping her chin on the concrete, and it busted it open. And so she came out, she's crying. I, compressed it, and then I looked at it, and I was like, ooh. So that's, I said that we're gonna have to go to the medic. So here we are in the Dominican Republic going to the doctor. And again, the point was, the first thing I didn't do was give her vitamin D, or the first thing I didn't do was give her a probiotic or check her spine or anything like that. The first thing I did was recognize that there was a potential need for medical care, and I sought out medical care.
Exactly.
And once we dealt with that problem, now luckily we ended up foregoing the stitches, and it's healed up beautifully. So that's really great to see. And of course, as I explained to Andy, the fact is that the reason your body healed up well is because you have a body that functions as well as possible. And that's why we got her spine checked afterwards. That's why we didn't eat a bunch of sugar afterwards. That's why we, tried to make sure that everything was in place for her to go ahead and recover in an optimal way. But to make our point, I went to the medic first. And I'm a corrective chiropractor. I'm the CEO of Life by Design. I didn't do any of those things first. I did what needed to be done given the particular situation.
Sure. So important point though. And the next step on top of this, and this is where some of the frustration comes in. There's an extrapolation that gets made sometimes with these studies from probiotics can't treat the stomach flu, to, well, then probiotics are completely unnecessary for the human being.
Right, right.
Right,
Yeah.
because the people, again, and let's, I mean, let's talk about confirmation bias, which is something that we all have. We tend to, view the world through a lens. And if your main purpose is to fix or treat diseases, you're tending to view everything through that specific lens. So if something doesn't help fix or treat a disease, it's very simple. And I'm not blaming the individual. It's up to the people reading these studies. It's up to you, the listener, to decide what's good for you and what's not good for you. However, just be aware that, when somebody tells you that something is not good for you and useless for you to take, sometimes it can require more investigation on your part to see what the actual use is for.
Yeah, and I know for the average person, this is complicated because
It is complicated.
well, because we're brought up in a culture that is very much a disease treatment culture. And so we're all brought up in this mindset that, if I have a symptom, that something's wrong. If I don't have a symptom, that nothing is wrong. And of course, I was just talking to a client this morning, and one of her patients had a son, 21 years old, who went to bed the night before, woke up the next day, had died, and
Wow.
had an infection,
Jesus.
some type of cardiac infection, but otherwise was, a healthy, thriving 21-year-old. And, it's just one of those things where we don't give enough thought to what we don't see or feel. We don't know in that case, how is that child's body functioning? Do they have other functional deficiencies, whether it be diet or, exercise or sleep or whatever else that, maybe would have been the 1% difference to create enough immune response to overcome an infection. Hard to say. Obviously, we're talking kind of about a lifeboat question here.
Right.
Difficult to answer. But my point is, we're culturally trained to believe that if we feel good, that everything's fine. If we feel bad, that something's wrong. And so it only makes sense that our attention goes to, well, if I feel bad in one of these 500 ways, what are my options to look at this? And now we're reaching a point over the last 10 or 15 years, especially, where people don't want to have that symptom or condition. They don't want to have to manage it with medication, at least not to the same degree. And I see more of a push where people want to avoid medication, which is great. In some cases. In some cases, it's absolutely required. And I think you can actually go to the other side of the coin where you're trying to avoid medication. And there's times where you probably would have been better off actually taking it. And that's where understanding the goal is so important. But if you're a layperson, it gets really difficult and complicated to start to kind of pick your way through this and decide what to do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, going back to, confirmation bias, if we're looking at the alternative world, it's the opposite is true. There's the vilification of drugs and surgery, not proper contextualization.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I probably prior to the development of Life by Design
Me
was
too. Me too.
completely guilty of that, and guilty of positioning medicine as something that was, not good, something that was, injuring people. And of course, there are statistics that support that. Medical care improperly used is a major problem. It's overprescription of medication. It's side effects to drug use. So, I mean, all that is real, but it doesn't negate the fact that there's a time and a place. But on the flip side of that, it just makes sense to me that irregardless of whether you have a symptom or condition, you would still be focused on the creation of health. And that's really what we're focused on at Life by Design is how do we get people to move out of the mindset of I'll do nothing and then I'll have a symptom or an identifiable condition and then I'll do something, to what are the things that I need to do proactively to meet the needs and requirements of my body to function at its full optimal capacity all the time. So my life experience is better. So I feel better, have more energy, enjoy my life, and can do the things I'd like to do. That's the change in mindset. It's the approach to dealing with, pathogenesis to this flip over to creating health or salutogenesis.
Yeah, yes, I completely agree. And the sad part, I was listening to what you were saying, is I wish most people, quote, did something when they were diagnosed with a disease. I know lots
Right.
of people diagnosed with a disease who continue to do nothing about it.
Yeah. Well, so give us an example, Kratia, if you can.
True. I mean, there's lots of people diagnosed with diabetes who refuse to
Right.
change their diet. They refuse to
Right.
get their
Right.
body moving, right? And then, stuff like that. There's people who are diagnosed with, things that are nutritionally based that refuse to change their diet, refuse to get moving. They refuse to see the doctor. The doctor doesn't know anything. And it's just frustrating to, it's like I'm talking about old Croatian people because, it's like that mentality. We don't trust the
Right.
doctors, right? And we don't want to do anything to
Right.
help ourselves in this situation. So it's going to go from bad to worse very, very quickly.
Well, and I actually think, for the medical doctors, it's a tough position to be in because, again,
It's
a
very
lot of
tough.
this is at a context where people will say, oh, well, drugs are bad and medicine kills people and, you should never go to a doctor and these are the things that, you do hear more today than you did 25 years ago. And I would prefer that we reach the point where we recognize that there's times where medical care is going to save your life, and there's times where you need to intervene in an extreme way, not necessarily to create health, but in order to stop yourself from dying. And that's usually what I'll explain to patients is, there's a time and a place for a medication. It may not help your body create health, but if it can stop you from dying right now, I consider that a plus because it's really difficult to create health if you're dead.
Oh, again, it's just about creating the proper context for all these things. And I think that's the point of this, right? We're going back to the study full circle, right? I get it. It doesn't treat. I'm glad somebody looked at it. It doesn't treat the stomach flu, great, but it does something positive. So let's use it for that purpose, right? And that's it. That's like the message, right? Let's just put everything in the proper context for yourself, so you know what to do when the situation arises.
Well, it'd be interesting to see studies that looked at, for example, you know, people who were sufficient in these major areas, whether it be sleep, exercise, gut biome, nutrition, structural neural health, versus people who weren't. And then if you want to measure different physiological processes, blood pressure, vertical jump, reaction time, immune system cells, all these types of things that would be a look at how the body's functional requirements, or I should say functional outcomes, change when you either meet the requirements or don't. That would be a very interesting study to look at. The problem really is when you look at kind of this realm of research, it's funded by organizations that generally have some type of agenda in order to accomplish. And if you have the money, then you get to promote your agenda. That's just the way that it is. And, I don't see that being any different. We need to be able to use logic to understand this information because it's probably going to be, if ever, 50, hundreds of years before we really see studies that are going to look at the things that you and I would love to see.
Oh, again, you go back to it's done by the New England Journal of Medicine. So the purpose of medicine, I think this is a great study, putting things in their proper context. They're looking at a potentially a new way to help treat something where there's little treatment for, right? Like the stomach flu is typical care
Right.
recommendations from your doctor are drink a lot of water, rest, and don't really move far away from your bathroom. So, I mean, it makes sense that they're looking at some type of method in shortening the duration and the intensity of the stomach flu. And in this case, it looks like it's not going to be probiotics.
Right.
So I get it. I would love to see more studies on, physiology and function.
Right.
However, they're not going to come from the medical profession. And I'm going to argue that they shouldn't come from the medical profession because they're not about improving physiology. They're about treating a disease.
Yeah. Nope. Makes sense. Great episode today, as always. Great show. And guys, check out the show notes at lifebydesign.com. And thank you for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.